since we don't have anymore the cheap gas as a bridge technology, I think there will be a lot of pressure to take decisions in the near future.
I'm sure you remember that in one of our most recent episodes, we talked about hydrogen-powered fuel cells being the way to go to decarbonize the aviation industry. And our speaker was quite convinced that the availability of clean, meaning green hydrogen, and the distribution of it would not be the big issue. But is that really so? And how does it look like if we're not only talking about aviation, which is comparatively a small industry, but if we also talk about transportation as such, if we talk about shipping, and if we talk about decarbonizing heavy industry? Are we really on track of having enough clean, meaning green hydrogen available here in Europe? And would we be able to distribute it? And apart from that, how are the recent geopolitical events influencing all of this process? Let's find out in this episode. Welcome to the Smartery podcast, a podcast for and with the creators of the new energy world. A world in which energy will be renewable, decentralized and digital, bringing together electricity, heat and mobility. Let us show you how we will get there and who will get us there. My speaker today is not only well-versed in all questions around energy strategy, but she is a literal powerhouse herself. Not only is she the head of the chair of economics at the University Erlangen-Nuremberg, she's also the director of the Center Hydrogen.Bavaria, H2B in short, and a member of the German government's National Hydrogen Council. Welcome, Professor Veronika Grimm.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, really. And I think with this episode, we cut right to the chase and let's talk about, or let's address the elephant in the room. And obviously that is the war in Ukraine and consequently the geopolitical crisis we have, which translates into a very, very hard energy crisis. I know Nord Stream 2 is off the table now. And I think Russia was planning on the long term also of using it, for example, for blue hydrogen. What is your view on this? How will this situation influence also the hydrogen strategy in Europe and specifically the role that blue hydrogen could play in our future hydrogen mix?
Yeah, I think the geopolitical situation is now definitely a new one since the attack of Russia at Ukraine. We have already moved from a rule-based to a power-based world order in recent years, but now we are definitely in a new regime. And this means that we have to become independent from Russian energy carriers, from Russian fossil energy carriers much faster than we originally planned. In the discussion of hydrogen strategies, this already always had a certain role. So one narrative was that with the transition to hydrogen from fossil energy carriers to hydrogen, there could be a diversification of energy supplies, so we could import green hydrogen from countries all over the world and reduce the dependency on Russia. So that was one narrative already. But now, of course, we have to go much faster. And we will have more expensive fossil energy carriers in the transition period, because that was one second plan that came with the transition to renewables, that we wanted to transform our industries using fossil gas as a cheap transitory bridge technology, basically. And this is also off the table because fossil energy carriers, in particular gas, will remain more expensive if we have to get independent from Russia and have to procure gas supplies from all over the world.
If I may just dive into a very small detail here, because I'm really curious about it, is that in Europe we have this big discussion about what really is green hydrogen. From a German perspective, it has to be produced with renewables. From a French perspective, it would be even green if it's produced with nuclear power. And then you also have, I think, countries such as the Netherlands who are keen or Norway on really putting blue hydrogen into the mix. And I know one of the arguments back then for Nord Stream 2 was that it also could have a backward effect and push Russia towards producing more blue or green hydrogen, because that's what they could ship through this new pipeline. So does it influence also the discussion about which specific form of hydrogen we would be using?
I'm sure that it will affect those perspectives. In Europe, there are different perspectives, as you just mentioned. So in Germany, we have a very particular sense of seeing green hydrogen as the key component. And it was always controversial to allow also for different colors in the transition period. But I think the pressure to allow for different colors on the one hand will get higher. So we will have to rely on hydrogen, for example, produced by nuclear power. It is an open question what role blue hydrogen will play, because if gas supply is getting more expensive, of course, blue hydrogen will also be getting more expensive. The original view was that in the period where we rely on gas in the transition period as a bridge technology, we could also rely on blue hydrogen, which is, of course, if the gas price is low, is a possibly cheap transitory technology which allows us to set up the supply chains more early. But of course, if now gas is getting more expensive because we have to procure it from more expensive sources, then also blue hydrogen will not have that kind of an advantage anymore as compared to green hydrogen. And on the other hand, we have to speed up the imports of green hydrogen, and blue hydrogen could maybe speed up the process, but will not so much be a transition technology that is cheap anymore, because I think it will remain more expensive during the next few years if we get independent from Russia and procure LNG gas from countries worldwide.
So what I took away from that statement was like 3 key points, and one being that generally the whole process of implementing hydrogen, not only specifically, but on large in the German industry, has been sped up. That whereas before we could allow ourselves a discussion which sort of color in hydrogen we would go for, we do not have that luxury anymore. We need to basically put our sights on all of them. But the price development favors green hydrogen at the moment. So our Minister of Economics here in Germany, Robert Habeck, just recently traveled to Qatar, talked to the Emir of Qatar about a long-term partnership in regards to oil and also gas. We want to build 2 large LNG terminals here in Germany. And I think that brings about a couple of questions I would like to dive into. The first one being LNG terminals are not exactly the cheapest sort of infrastructure. I would like to know, and these investments also sort of, manifest the strategy for coming years, if not decades. Is that an investment and a strategy that works in favor of hydrogen? Or is it something that takes away investments that otherwise could have gone into the hydrogen infrastructure?
I think we have to refocus, and not only to focus on the cheapest way to procure energy. This is what we have done with Russia, basically, which led us in a really wrong dependence on one supplier, which is from a energy security point of view, a very bad idea. So I think the LNG terminals, that's something that has been discussed in Germany for many years, since at most 10 years. In 2009 already, the Monopoly Commission advised the German government to build LNG terminals to increase competition at the gas market. So I think it is a good idea to go in this direction. It's maybe not the cheapest way if you look at it from a system perspective, if you minimize cost of the overall system, but if you take into account also the geopolitical aspects, it's definitely good to open up new ways to import LNG gas. I think it is also a way to accelerate hydrogen imports, because we need terminals to import hydrogen in the longer run. So these LNG terminals will could be adapted, of course, to also import hydrogen or energy carriers based on green hydrogen. So this is a way that we should open up. And I think the cooperation with regions for example, the MENA region, United Arab Emirates, Qatar. These could be corporations that speed up the import of hydrogen because these are states that already export energy carriers to a large extent, and they are also ambitious to export green hydrogen, and the transformation path is across blue hydrogen. So we could agree on importing LNG and also agree, aside of this, on importing hydrogen. We should not focus on only these suppliers. So this, of course, opens up the danger that we create new unilateral dependencies. I think we should at the same time develop cooperations with many, many states worldwide that have good conditions for renewable energies. And these could be states like Australia, African states like Namibia, Chile, Argentina, Canada.
There's one thing that I got that's very important to understand technically. So these LNG terminals could be retrofitted also for the purpose of storing or receiving hydrogen, which is quite important because hydrogen is a very fickle gas. It is so effusive that it's very hard to actually create infrastructure for it. And just the fact that you could retrofit these LNG terminals for hydrogen, of course, makes it then also really a future investment. And the other thing that is quite interesting, that's what I wanted to ask, if we do not go then into another geopolitical dependence, if we so strongly rely on just one or two states in the MENA region. But as you mentioned, we could use the same infrastructure to receiving gas or hydrogen from various regions in the world. Is there a discussion about that in the EU, or is that like is that individual approach by Germany, or is there like an EU agreement on really spreading out into the MENA region or to South America, for example?
I think there is a big consensus that the transformation should be thought together with development policy issues, because the transformation to renewables opens up a lot of opportunities also for developing and emerging countries, which have good conditions to export energy carriers. There's also a controversy whether those countries should first decarbonize themselves or whether they should focus on exports and at the same time decarbonize. And I think the latter makes a lot of sense because they have the opportunity to benefit from scale effects if they prepare, for example, hydrogen exports. This means they have to install renewables, they have to install the electrolyzers. Maybe if it's a region that has no freshwater supply but only salt water, there have to be installed desalination units. And all these installations could, of course, be done in bigger dimensions, and the desalination units could then increase water supply in the region as well. The renewable plants could be scaled larger, so they benefit also the country and not only the exports, and so on.
That's quite interesting to hear because, of course, a lot of the time the argument is like, oh, we cannot go at it alone as the EU because if the rest of the world doesn't follow, we're stuck in a hydrogen island here. But the good point is that it actually will influence other regions in the world to also accelerate their development of renewables. That's very interesting. So there's an agreement, I heard. How does it look like, the overall strategy in the EU? Are we fast enough with the EU hydrogen strategy? And are there different paces, for example, when it comes to the national strategy in Germany or other countries?
This is very difficult to answer at the moment because I think we have to adapt many issues concerning the hydrogen strategy. I think the need for European infrastructure will be much bigger due to the new goal to become independent and to foster energy security faster. And this will certainly mean that we have to build our hydrogen backbone, all the pipelines and so on that will have to be built faster. And at the same time, there are different views in the countries of the European Union what to develop and how to develop hydrogen. In Germany, we have a focus very much also in the on the industrial policy opportunities. So there are big chances for industry to supply key components for hydrogen supply chains. So the electrolyzers, the logistics technologies, applications, for example, fuel cells and mobility. And I think the German hydrogen strategy in principle focuses a lot also on these opportunities for the German industry. But on the other hand, of course, there are certain aspects that hinder a quick development. For example, the very clear focus on green hydrogen. I think we could be much faster if we allow in the transition period a multitude of colors of hydrogen so that we can accelerate faster. And this would also imply, of course, more opportunities for industry to provide applications, to provide electrolyzers, to provide logistics technologies faster and improve their positions at the world market.
It's great that this infrastructure actually would be manufactured here in Europe and not in other regions of the world. And how does it look then further down in the value chain? What's the overall job potential, not only, for example, for the key infrastructure such as electrolyzers, but then if you go further down into the various applications hydrogen will be used for? This
is very hard to say. This depends also very much on the developments right now. The decisions, what is continued in Europe. For example, we have a lot of transformation processes ongoing. In the steel industry, we plan to produce green steel as one of the first countries in the world. In the chemical industry, there is a big transformation going on in the direction of green chemicals. And it is still an open question how many of these processes will be located in Germany and what part of the industry will maybe also relocate to other parts of the world. And this can be illustrated maybe nicely if you look at the question how you can transport hydrogen. It's certainly a challenge, and you cannot transport pure gaseous hydrogen quite easily, or overseas you have to transform it. Either you have to liquefy it by cooling it down, or you have to bind it and transport it, for example, in the form of ammonia or methanol, or using liquid organic hydrogen carriers. So there are a lot of technologies, and some of these technologies imply that if we import hydrogen in a certain form, for example, in the form of ammonia, then it is of course questionable whether we will continue to produce ammonia to the extent that we do it right now from fossil gas.
Okay, so it's an ongoing and an open discussion or development, so it's hard to put numbers to it in the sense of job potential. But what could the EU do to protect its investments and developments? Or on the other hand, what would the EU need to do to make the whole industry involved in hydrogen product, or also, of course, then green steel, market competitive in a global scale?
I think the strategy should not be to protect everything that we have right now, because the relative locational advantage of production will certainly change if we switch from fossil energy carriers to renewable ones. Ammonia is one example. It may make very much sense to produce it from imported cheap fossil gas in Germany. But if you want to produce it from hydrogen, then it is much more favorable to produce it at a location where renewable hydrogen is cheap and is there. So you can produce it at the site. So I think we have to look very closely which energy intensive industries are strategically important, because they provide certain key steps in the supply chains that we need in Europe. And I think we should protect industries that are strategically important. I think we should develop industries that we do not yet have, that have excellent conditions in Europe for further development. And this is, for example, the production of key components for all the hydrogen supply chains of applications in mobility, fuel cells. I think there are a lot of jobs being created in these industries if we develop it, and we have a real competitive advantage because this is some key expertise of the European engineering. There's some key European engineering expertise, so European firms are really worldwide leading in many of these sectors and applications, and so we should really develop this, and we should care for not protecting industries that we cannot afford to remain located in Europe, because it would just be quite expensive. I think we have to balance it. I think some parts of, for example, I mentioned ammonia. I mean, some parts of the chemical industries will certainly relocate, and we have to be very carefully in evaluating which kind of supply chain effects we will generate by this, which relocations we can afford from a strategic perspective, and which critical industries we should protect and we should provide good conditions for. And for example, green steel is one of those issues. I think by developing green steel in Germany and in Europe, I think there's a competitive advantage that we generate. First, we need steel. We need the quality steel that is produced in Europe at the moment as an input factor. For example, in the automotive sector, we have a unique selling point in installing the first green steel installations and ovens. And I think this is something that really gives us a competitive advantage. And this is a key industry that we should further develop, of course, in Europe.
That does sound like a smart approach to get rid of these things that would not be economically sensible to keep, and to have a sight at the developing technologies and markets. But it's also a very difficult thing to negotiate, I guess, in the EU as such, and also in the individual countries, because it's always hard to get people convinced to let go of certain already existing industries and put their sights on future industries. So I hope that we will have the courage to make the necessary decisions in this regard.
Maybe one aspect. I think there will be a lot of pressure because under the new conditions, since we don't have anymore the cheap gas as a bridge technology, I think there will be a lot of pressure to take decisions in the near future. And I think we have to be keeping in mind that, of course, we discuss a lot about industries that we already have here at the moment, but we should discuss, of course, much more about chances, about opportunities which can contribute to value creation tomorrow.
And let's hope that we have learned our lesson from the development of the PV industry and basically all of it wandering off to China. Let's hope that that is a lesson learned that we will implement in the development of the hydrogen industry. Let's put a number to it. At the moment, the plan is to have electrolyzer capacities of around 40 gigawatt until 2030. Is that enough? Which number should we set for the next 8 years?
I think we should set ambitious numbers, and I think we should somehow think in concentric circles. We should develop the hydrogen agenda in Europe quite fast, and I think we should install electrolyzer capacity where we have good sites to develop the production of green hydrogen. But of course, we have to also install the infrastructure that enables us to transport the hydrogen to the consumption centers. So the big challenge is to coordinate all these processes and to coordinate them also within the European Union. This is not a national endeavor, of course. This is something that we should develop at the European Union, and we should focus on it as a possibility to contribute to the energy independence that we want to have, in the sense that the supply from a single country that we get does not make us dependent, in the sense that we cannot get along without it.
What number would you put to it? What's an ambitious number in gigawatts till 2030?
This is very difficult to say. I think 40 gigawatts is something that we have to see whether we can reach it. In Germany, the new goal of the coalition is 10 gigawatt. I think this is very ambitious as well. And if we get along faster, it is good, but of course, these processes are highly non-linear. If a dynamic is coming into play, then it can easily be more. But a dynamic means also that we need to install the infrastructure at the same time, and we have to install also the production capacity and so on.
We have to create a whole ecosystem, basically, and it doesn't make sense to just install 60 gigawatts if we can't get it to where it's needed, I guess. Well, Veronika, that's already been a really interesting discussion. I would have many more questions, but fortunately, actually, we will get a chance to dive deeper into it, and that is on May 11th to 13th as part of the Smarter Europe, because you will be attending the Green Hydrogen Forum there in May. What do you personally expect from the exhibition? What are you looking forward to?
I think it is very important now to meet and to discuss the new conditions that we are in. I think the dynamic of all the processes towards the transformation will be quite high, and I hope very much that we have a clearer picture by then what the new conditions will be. The Easter package of the German government will appear soon, and I think we have to accelerate, and I think we'll do that.
Wonderful. So thanks a lot for joining us today. I'll try to come up with an impromptu wrap up of all the different points we discussed. But I think there's some key takeaways. That was investment in LNG terminals would be a long-term investment because they could be retrofitted for the purpose of hydrogen. You also said it's really important that we do not only put our sights on cooperating with 1 or 2 countries in the MENA region, but that we make sure that we reach out to various regions in the world to limit our dependency. And I think also one important point was that there's some tough decisions to make, which industries we're willing to give up and which are the ones worthwhile focusing on the future, also industries that do not exist yet. And I think one really important point is that we are creating a whole ecosystem, and it doesn't help to put all the money and all the development on just electrolyzers or just infrastructure. It all needs to happen at the same time. And hopefully we will experience some positive dynamic. That means that while we create this whole ecosystem, we suddenly will see a much faster pace in reaching the capacities we need until 2030, for example, to meet our climate goals. So thanks a lot for joining us today, Veronika.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really good wrap up.
Thank you. For more information on green hydrogen, visit the Smarter Europe taking place on May 11th to 13th in Munich. In the Green Hydrogen Forum and Expo exhibition area, cross-industry and cross-sector companies from all over the world will gather. Jointly, they will accelerate the introduction of hydrogen, fuel cells, electrolyzers and power-to-gas to the markets. Tickets can be found online at thesmartere.de.